All right, we are live. Welcome to the Gunner Technology Livestream, a weekly tech talk for non-techies and techies alike. I'm your host, Derek Americans. With me is CEO of Gunner Technology, Cody Swan. What's up, Cody?
Just another day in paradise. Every day, living the dream.
Living the dream, right? Living the dream.
That's right. That's
All
right.
right. So let's. We were off last week for the holiday for July 4th, but let's dive right back into it this week. It's probably good that we had a week off because we raised a bit of a ruckus with our surveillance episode. But before we get to that,
Oh, did we? Did we?
A little
I'm
bit,
glad to hear
yeah. Before we get to that, let's get through the housekeeping here. So, the winner this week of our Country Shore giveaway. Country Shore is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. You can visit them at countryshoreoutfitters.com. Sign up for the Country Shore giveaway on our Facebook page. The winner this week is Tommy B from Stacyville, Iowa. Another town that I'm not familiar with. Everyone knows Tommy B, but Stacyville, Iowa, I'm not familiar with.
It does remind me. I wonder if it's. Oh gosh, I just dropped the name of it. The Hawkins, Indiana, where the site of Stranger Things takes place. Which I just finished season 3 of that, so it's fresh in my mind.
I mean, in my head, there's no season 3. It ends in season 2, right at the dance. That's the end of the series. That's the perfect little wrap up to the series.
Season 3 was like, if you take it by itself, it's good, but they've run out of ideas. So like, if you never saw season 1 or season 2, you'd be like, this is amazing. But if you've seen season 1, season 2, you're like, this is season 1 and season 2.
I mean, season 2 is basically season 1.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like,
and so season 3, I guess, is just season 2 and season 1 all over.
Right.
Again.
So if you just saw it on its own, like, you'd be like, this is incredible.
10-episode thing.
And it's only 8 episodes. It's only 8 episodes, so that's even better.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd be like, this is amazing. But you're like, I've seen this. I have seen this.
Yeah, that's a hard pass for me. I honestly, it would have been a great little 2-season arc. Like, I don't know what that kid's name is who gets taken into the upside down world.
Will, I think.
Yeah, like it would have been a great, like, it was the first season was setting up Will having to deal with the upside down, and the second season was resolving him having to deal with the upside down. If you ignore like all the craziness with what's the girl's name, like 11?
Elle. She goes by Elle, but yes, 11.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. With the craziness with her, like meeting like the dumpster kids who had like supernatural powers. I just imagine that didn't happen. But yeah. Anyways, Tommy B from Stacyville, Iowa. Not from, what is it, Hawkins, Indiana?
Hawkins, Indiana.
Hawking?
Hawking.
Stephen Hawking. Isn't the show's all about references anyway, so they should call it Hawking, Indiana.
Hawkins, Indiana.
Tommy B, got a hat along comes our ebooks. So keep an eye out for those. And while you're on our Facebook page, sign up for the Country Shore giveaway. All of you who did one this week, go ahead and answer. Go ahead.
I was to say, I will say though that the thing that's interesting about watching Stranger Things is like they need to find out like they need to find out where something is, and they need to find out what like it's a mathematical constant. I can't remember what it was, the name of it, but they need to figure out a mathematical constant. So they need to find someone who knows this stuff, which is always weird. I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean you don't know what this is? Like, pull out your phone. So that is interesting.
But it takes place in the 80s.
Right, exactly. That's what I mean. It's exactly what I mean. And I forget that. So they're like,
yeah.
And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know what the theory, what the constant is? Like, why? What's wrong with you? Find a computer. Like,
Wikipedia. What the fuck? Yeah. I guess that's why you always have to set stuff in the past now. Stuff that's contemporaneous is just unbelievable because there's always something where it's like, why did they do this instead of just using the internet?
Yes.
Constantly.
Yes.
So I guess it's good that it's set in 83 or whatever it's set in.
Yes, totally.
Is that the plot of season 3? They have to figure out a mathematical constant?
No, it's just the plot of one episode kind of thing.
It's still a hard pass. But while you're on our Facebook page, go ahead and answer our question of the week, which this past 2 weeks was, has your data ever been hacked that you know of? And overwhelmingly, the response was yes. So I guess everyone's been hacked at this point, which I guess isn't surprising. There's been some major hacks in the past. Target, Wells Fargo. I guess it'd be rare if your data hadn't been compromised at some point.
Right, exactly. It would. at some point you kind of have to have had some sort of compromise. Like even if like, you know, someone like uses your credit card at a gas station, that's a compromise.
Yeah,
so
it's an old school compromise.
Yeah.
I was gonna. There was one, wasn't it Equifax
Oh,
that had
Equifax is a
a big
big
data
one.
breach? Because that was one that got me. I got notified that my data had actually made it out into the wild, so that's
And
fun.
then they sold their services to
The
help
high
you
standard.
kind of like know if your leaked
Yeah,
data had been used.
it made you wonder. It made you
Mhm.
think. I mean, that's a great business plan.
Mhm.
Um, allegedly, we're not accusing Equifax of doing that, of course. Um, but anyways, that the question of the week this week coming up for our next episode, which is going to be about. Well, I guess this episode was going to be about data breaches, but we had to reschedule. But next week's episode is going to be about sort of like algorithms and the algorithmic control of certain processes in today's world. So the question of the week next week is: would you be okay with? I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have it up, but would you be okay with computers determining sentencing for convicts? So I guess that's
Oh,
one of the ideas is like based on objective data. So would you, like, you know, you punch in what the relevant facts are of the case and then have a computer determine, you know, 10 to 15 years would
you know
be
what's
a
funny is
reasonable.
that like the relevant facts of the case is again entering a human subjectivity, and that humans would determine what the relevant facts of the case are. At the same time, I'm fine with that. Like again, kind of going back to our last episode, which was 2 weeks ago. Like just open the floodgates, man. Just open the floodgates. I'm
Theoretically, you could get to a point where a computer could determine what the relevant facts are.
Yeah, and you know what's weird is that I found out that military trials. So the jury is the body that decides the punishment. So, and they have a maximum penalty that they can divvy out for each charge, but
Mhm.
there's no minimum. So in military court, you can be found guilty of murder, and the jury can be like, he's fine, time served. I mean, that's what's really interesting is they leave it up
Huh.
to the jury to decide what the penalty will actually
Well,
be. With
like in the actual court of law, do they give juries minimum sentencing guidelines? Because I know they give them sentencing guidelines. I don't know if they do they
well,
give them a range of acceptable penalties
are you talking about in military court or regular
or
court?
regular court.
So, well, the judge does the sentencing in a regular court. Um,
I thought the jury would does the jury recommend sentencing? Because I thought part of it was like the jury would
I don't know. I thought it was always the
like.
judge who basically.
Am I miss?
Did,
I'm gonna look that up while you're explaining how military tribunals work.
yeah. So the other thing that was interesting about, like I said, it was basically if you're found guilty in a military court, it's a judge of your peers, and by peers they try to get people of your equal rank, of the defendant's equal rank. Um, so it's almost kind of like it's kind of weird in the fact that it would be like a New York City police officer being like arrested for like homicide or something, and then his jury is like Boston police officers. So it's kind of weird. So like in the case, in the reason I know all this is the Mark Gallagher Navy SEAL trial. So all his jurors were selected from the Marines, but of equal rank. So it's kind of weird in the fact that you kind of have like a really good old boy system that like kind of extends upward into the branch of the military where kind of things are left between the equals in terms of determining almost everything.
Interesting. So I guess it's like a jurisdiction by jurisdiction uh determination of where juries actually will determine sentences, and I guess a lot of times it has to do with whether it's the death penalty or not.
Oh, okay, yeah. So the jury can recommend the death penalty, kind of thing.
Exactly. uh but I guess it's almost always the judge, but occasionally it's the jury. So I must just be imagining like crime shows I've watched where the jury's decided whether to give the criminal a death penalty or not. But anyways, hop on our Facebook page and answer that question of the week, whether you'd be okay with computers determining sentencing. The interesting thing too with that is, I don't know if you ever saw the study where it was like conviction rates based on time of day, when a judge was sort of determining guilt or innocence. And after a judge had eaten lunch, their conviction rates dropped precipitously. So it's like,
Right.
there's all these weird human factors that affect outcomes. So it's almost like you want to remove that as much as possible. But then if you remove that as much as possible, you basically get to the point where computers just run the world.
Which again, I'm fine with. Just go all in. I mean,
Which I guess leads directly into the blowback from our surveillance episode, where people were basically saying that we're condoning 1984, like an Orwellian surveillance state. Which I guess to a certain extent we are, or we were. And I guess the danger there is that there are people who, creative people, I guess, especially, who wouldn't be as productive under a state of massive surveillance. Where I guess you would want some measure of freedom to allow them to reach their full potential. And in a certain sense, the actual purpose, I mean, this is, I guess, controversial, but the purpose of the democratic system is basically to keep things as stable and calm as possible, so that the most effective citizens can provide as much public good as possible, and that you might potentially artificially limit that by implementing a massive surveillance state. So it's an interesting counter argument.
So wait, dumb that down for me. It's so basically, if people know they're being watched, they're not going to reach their potential as human beings, kind of thing.
In certain cases, and especially in the creative class, where you need a certain amount of going against the grain, or
so it's sort of like the theory.
Way.
It's sort of like about the theory of like tenure for professors.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Okay, all right. Well, we see how the tenure system works out. So
yeah, I mean, it's a poor analogy in the sense that the entire educational system is a hot mess right now.
Right.
But I guess maybe that it's an apt analogy in the sense that it's a hot mess right now.
I mean, I think in certain respects, I don't know if I was going to say you need. I would say you. Now I'm going to change my verbiage to want. You want the court jester who can say stuff with impunity. So, but I don't think you need that. You want that, but I don't think.
You're breaking up a little bit, but I think that this is actually the perfect lead into our episode this week about encryption. But what people are hesitant about is that you look at countries that have massive surveillance currently, and it's like Russia and China, and those places are they're countries where dissidents are jailed or killed, where like the press is as unfree as you can possibly get. So I guess that the danger is that you sort of slide into a Sino-Russo reality that you don't want.
Yeah, and again, my argument was like, on its face, surveillance isn't what you just described. Surveillance is not suppression; it's surveillance.
Yeah, and I guess the counter argument there is: can you have surveillance without it sliding into oppression? And I think the historical record proves out that you can't. You can't have one without the other. They sort of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean, because we don't have an example, we say that, but it's what one doesn't. It's not like if you turn the temperature down below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, water will freeze. It's not like a scientific formula. It's just because that's the way it has always happened in the past.
Which I mean, is the argument that communists make and fascists make, that we've tried it and it resulted in gulags and death camps, but maybe if we tried it again, it wouldn't result in that. Or possibly it's endemic to the system.
Right. Exactly. And the thing is like, Same thing with communism. It's like it's a big experiment. It's a big social experiment. So the risks of saying like it's been a total failure everywhere else in the world and everywhere else throughout history, but let's just try it again. Like,
yeah, which is like, let's try a massive surveillance state. Like it you know, it's proved to be terrible in China, but that's China, and it's proved to be terrible in Russia, but that's Russia.
right.
But you know, let's implement a massive surveillance, and then we'll theoretically roll it back. I'm sure the surveillance state will let us just roll it back.
Right. So I would say the chances are always high that surveillance leads to suppression, but it's not necessarily that one causes the other. Like one may lead to the other.
Isn't that causality? Isn't that the definition of causality?
No, I don't think it's like necessarily causation, but like because we can surveil, now it's easier for us to suppress. So we're going to make that decision to suppress.
Yeah, it's almost like the confluence of surveillance and any sort of powerful state leads to suppression.
Right. Because people are given the power, and people cannot really juggle power in a non-suppressive way, kind of thing. Like that's actually what it is like surveillance is power, and power leads to suppression. That's kind of like the linear flow that I see it as, anyway.
I guess surveillance leads to more suppression, or a more widespread suppression.
Yeah. And I mean, again, like theoretically, I mean, because you look at Russia and China, and they didn't have like laws in place to prevent what happens from surveillance. So like we have a First Amendment that guarantees us free speech, and the government can't suppress that. So if we implement surveillance, and then surveillance is used to suppress that First Amendment, there are laws against that would push back on the use of that surveillance to suppress that First Amendment. Whereas such a safeguard didn't exist in Russia or China ever. So why wouldn't they use surveillance to suppress free speech? Because they could always have done that before. So I guess my point is, like, once surveillance is in place, it's too late to implement like new safeguards. You kind of got to have the safeguards in place before you implement massive surveillance.
And even then, it's still a massive experiment, and you don't actually know what's going to come of it.
Speaking of that, did you see that like the CIA, I think it was, can identify you based on like, oh gosh, they're using some sort of lasers, and oh god, I gotta look this up. They can like they can like identify you by your breathing pattern or something.
Oh, okay. What?
I'm gonna look it up. It was crazy. It was something really weird.
It's like
their heartbeat. The Pentagon has a laser that
their heartbeats.
That's it. The Pentagon has the Pentagon has a laser that identifies people by their heartbeat. Their heartbeat.
Wow, that's horrifying. That's I'd love to see Ethan Hunt get around that though in Mission Impossible. Like an artificial heartbeat. That'd be a good. Because do you remember the one where you had to like they had gait analysis where you had to walk a certain way? It was in like the fifth one.
So I haven't seen it yet. So, but it's funny because
it's really cool.
They mentioned that in this article, the gait analysis. They
eventually they just bailed on that because they couldn't crack it because you can't actually fake that. I guess just like you can't fake a heartbeat. Man, that's hyper secure. I mean, stuff like that is cool, I guess. Speaking of hyper secure, the topic du jour is encryption. So I sort of had three broad topics. One we've already talked about, which is sort of the Tor network and the dark web, and how that sort of enables all of this nefarious activity, and how there's really no reasonable way around it. I guess just like a broad overview of how the Tor network works, because I don't think we actually talked about that. It's multiple layers of encryption. So you basically have, if I was talking to you, it would be like like if we were spies, we'd go through multiple intermediaries who would scramble the message in their own particular way, so that it would be much more difficult to unscramble. So I would talk to I think it's called a guard computer, and the guard computer and I would encrypt our message, and then the guard computer would talk to like a middleman computer, and they would encrypt their message, and then the middleman would talk to an exit computer, and they would encrypt their message, and then the exit computer would talk to you, and you guys would encrypt your message. So there's all these layers of encryption at any one given time, uh, which makes it that much harder for the message to be decoded. And I guess also makes it so that we're not directly talking to each other. So we have no idea. I don't know you, you don't know me. Each of the nodes in the Tor network doesn't know each other. So it's like this weird anonymous thing where nobody knows anyone, and they're sort of just exchanging all of these horrible things.
Yeah.
But realistically, the technology is there, and there's no way to stop it, which I guess is the difficult reality of the situation that we're currently dealing with. There's no good solution to it.
Yeah, I mean, there really is no good, there's no good solution to it at all, and that's just the thing. That's why I'm saying, kind of like, just go all in at this point. Like, just go all in.
Yeah, like unencrypted that, and I guess that's sort of, not to jump ahead, but I guess we can jump ahead, because the only other thing that I want to talk about is anonymity on the internet, and I don't like, if the internet wasn't anonymous, it would probably still be a cesspool, but it would be at least a slightly smaller cesspool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, exactly. That's right. A more contained cesspool. Like,
I guess there's a
shallow. There's no deep end.
Yeah, it'd be like a kiddie pool. It'd be a kiddie cesspool. I guess there's a long history though of anonymous writings and anonymous literature, and I guess that's been important historically, and maybe you don't want to lose that.
Yeah. You mean like kind of like Stephen King's pseudonym?
Yeah,
what was that?
Just Richard Bachman. That's all. Yeah, I mean, I guess like it's interesting that all this stuff sort of comes back to historical realities, and you know, surveillance. Your people go back to times when you know, there were massive suppressions, popular suppressions, and stuff like that of dictatorships, or you know, show trials, or you know, the Great Terror in France and stuff like that, and things that we don't want to repeat. But the odds of anything like that happening again, and I guess that's probably what everyone said right before it happened again. It just seems so unrealistic at this point.
Yeah, and again, but like you said, I'm sure everyone said, like, I mean, like, there's like an ongoing meme, like someone like time travels back to like 1917, and they're like, they ask someone, they're like, what year is it? They're like, oh, it's 1917. You're like, oh, so the middle of World War I, and they're like, what? Like World War One, like because everyone, like, after like it was the World War, like the war to end all wars.
Oh yeah.
Like another one, like, so it's no one thinks it's going to happen until it actually happens.
I mean, I wonder how it could actually happen though. I mean, in this like hyper connected world where global trade is so important, like how would industry allow a massive conflict to happen again?
Yeah, I mean, and again, it goes back to like how much of a deep state there is there actually, because if there's a big deep state where corporations are running the world, they wouldn't allow a conflict of massive scale that's going to drastically hurt the economy.
It seems like reasonable at this point. It's not even like deep state necessarily, though, isn't it? Isn't it just a political reality that most of the money that gets funneled to governments comes from multinational corporations, or the government itself is run by plutocrats? Like Russia is basically run by the ones who own the industries in Russia.
It's true. Yeah, it's 100% true. Like, I guess what you have to worry about is just like North Korea, like kind of like some lunatic cannon. Yeah.
I guess so. It's sort of an aside to the idea of anonymity and I guess encryption in general. So like uh, the thing I was struggling with as I was reading through all this stuff, and you'd probably have a better idea than me, is why people want or need to use encrypted messaging software who are just like messaging each other.
Yeah, I mean, I've always understood. I've always questioned the same thing. Like, why do you want that? And I mean, I guess like,
Is it because people are sending nudes? Like, is it just for sending nudes?
I always go back to that or something more nefarious, and that's why they want like the privacy. I just don't understand. Like that's the only reason I can think of where you would be so concerned that someone else might be like looking in on what you're doing. It's the only thing I can think of. I can't even think of something else.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff I came across was about like protecting the rights of, because I guess the big one is Telegram, which is I think a Russian guy founded, or a couple of Russian guys, that's been outlawed, I think, in the country.
Yeah, well, and that's fair. Like, I can see why they would want it in Russia, because like they want, like, there's some people who want to like lead a revolution, and like they don't want the government to know they're planning a revolution. So like in that case, I get it. But like no one cares. I mean, like if you're talking about like that fat blunt you smoked yesterday, like no one cares. Like no one cares. I mean, I guess
there is an irrational fear that the government is constantly monitoring you and actually cares about your life and the stuff that you do, when in fact 99.99% of the time they don't. And
right.
there's probably like 1,000 more nines after that.
Right. And I mean, I guess the only thing, like if you want to run for political office one day, then yeah, some stupid stuff can be used against you that really doesn't matter, but it appears to matter in a political race. Like that's the only thing.
Yeah, Beto O'Rourke drunkenly drove someone off the road and ran away.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he's like a leading candidate, or I guess
right.
Not anymore. I don't even know. I don't really
He's struggling.
Politics. Okay,
he's struggling.
Yeah, I don't think it actually matters.
Most of the stuff that comes back, I mean, yeah, most of the stuff that comes back in politics these days are like stuff that wasn't out in the open, but like Biden's been around so long that he's got some crufty old, like out of date stances on some issues that like back in the day, in his early days, would have been seen as like progressive, and now they're like actually seen as like racist. So like that's more of the stuff that people are getting hammered on these days, is the fact that they haven't been able to change as quickly as cultural norms have.
I guess it gets back to like the anonymous internet issue, which if you want to say something, like own your opinion. And I guess, I don't know, if you're not able to say your opinion out loud, maybe question that opinion, or just say it and own it. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and the weird thing is, again, we keep coming back to this, but like with the advent of like deep fakes and all that stuff, like you don't even need to have to say it. It'll be easy for someone to make it look like you said it. You know what I mean? Like, so
is that real concern?
No, I don't think it is. But I think my point is like, there's going to be no stopping this. Like, there's going to be no stopping from someone who wants to bring you down through like, kind of like a smear campaign from doing so.
A smear, a bagel and smear campaign.
Yes, exactly. So just stop worrying and like live your life. If you want to send nudes, send nudes. If you want to like make offensive jokes between people, make offensive jokes with people. Because my point is so like I'm more concerned with like politics here. So like I don't take Beto O'Rourke. Like let's just say like he has like friends and he makes like crass jokes among his friends, and so he's like worried about making those crass jokes over like Messenger. He wants to use Signal or whatever. The fact of the matter is, someone could easily spoof Beto O'Rourke, even in video, saying something offensive. So, like, my point is, there's going to be no getting around it.
If it ever comes out, just say it's fake.
Yeah, exactly. So your only defense is just to say it's fake, even if it isn't fake, and especially if it is fake, and kind of let the chips fall where they may. Like either people believe you or they don't. But and again, it used to be such a big deal about like nudes coming out. Like nudes were such a big deal, and now no one cares. No one cares. Like
Yeah,
no one cares.
It's a black eye if you don't have nudes leaked at this point.
Right.
That nobody
So
actually cares about you to leak your nudes.
yeah. So the thing is now, like, if eventually all this stuff will kind of go the way of nudes, where it's such a big deal if it gets leaked, and that then eventually people are going to be inundated with it, and they're just gonna be like, yeah, it's
It
I'm
seems
over it.
like there is a ton of, although I guess not. I was gonna say there's a ton of blowback for when somebody's like, like racist humor gets leaked, or something they some controversial statement that they made back in the day. It seems like there's actual repercussions to that, but I don't actually know that that's the case. Um, like like Kevin Hart lost he wasn't able to host the Oscars or the Emmys or something like that because he made gay jokes back in the day. But I
Oh, I
think
thought
he's
it was
still
because they
doing
couldn't find a mic stand that was short enough for him.
um so I don't know. I don't know. It seems like it shouldn't. And I guess the point being that if that encryption doesn't matter, like if we're not worried about people's conversations leaking, if we're adult enough to realize that sometimes people tell off-color jokes to each other in private, although I guess like we're still talking about Trump talking about grabbing women by the pussy, and this is like 5 years later. So I guess people do actually care about that kind of stuff, or
Yeah,
pretend to.
I think people care about it when it suits their
Political whims.
correct.
So I guess if we're adult enough to realize that people who actually care about this stuff are only pretending to care about this stuff, then there really doesn't need to be encryption, because encryption does enable, but again, you can't actually get rid of it. But encryption enables such uh like actual awful behavior. Like ISIS uses Telegram for all of its announcements. Like that's its main platform to coordinate its terrorist activities. So
like
like,
what's going to be at lunch at the school cafeteria.
yeah, or they announced that Kevin Hart was hosting the Oscars. That was a big ISIS event. But like, so is it worth it to enable that kind of behavior? And this is something that we go back and forth with all the time with technology, because like, there was a quote in one of the articles that I read. Let me pull it up real quick. Da, 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 da. After all, any technological innovation can be exploited for sinister purposes, and we cannot allow this to stop advancement. So there's this idea that like technology has to constantly advance, regardless of the effect that it has. So, it's the kind of thing where like if your app is being used for, somebody posted on Facebook that Epstein wants privacy. I don't know who Epstein is, but I think he's that guy who ran like underage flights for Bill Clinton so that he could have sex with 14-year-olds. That's just allegedly. That's what I've heard.
Oh, Epstein, like, yeah, he just got busted for running a giant. He's a pedophile.
Okay,
Epstein's a
so
pedophile.
like pedophiles would love to have encryption. But like, so if your app is being used by pedophiles and terrorists, like, shouldn't you take a step back and think, maybe we shouldn't have this app? Maybe we shouldn't build this app.
But I mean, that's the thing. Like, doesn't Signal want those type of users? Like,
is that Signal's core user? Is that their growth strategy? Is cornering the pedophile and terrorist market?
I mean, but this goes back to like these are libertarians, right? Where their thing is like, it's not my problem what people use my product for. I'm here to make $1, and that's it. So if I can provide a service, it's not my concern what that service is used for.
So whose concern is it what that service is used for?
Well,
is that where government regulation steps in?
Well, no, then you're really firing up the libertarians. But their argument is going to be like, so we shouldn't make wrenches because people could bash someone's head in with a wrench. That's the argument. Like, so we just shouldn't make anything then. Like, I mean,
wrenches don't encourage people to bash people's heads in with wrenches. These messaging apps seem to encourage people to engage in this kind of behavior.
And they're saying, no, we don't. No, we don't. We're just providing people who are concerned about privacy with potentially nefarious governments watching them a way to feel safe when they communicate.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at studies though that show that with greater access to, say, pedophilic materials, it actually increases the number of pedophilic activities that occur.
Sure, but again, the people who are building this are going to be saying that's a human problem. That's not a me problem.
That's not a me problem. That's a you problem.
I'm not encouraging them to do so. I'm not encouraging them to do so. Like,
well, then don't you have to be realistic about human nature and
well, no, I don't think
not
you do.
create
Well,
stuff that encourages the worst of human nature to come out?
I mean, that's an open-ended question, I guess you'd say, and I know the answer on the people who make these type of stuff
Right.
is
Absolutely not.
I'm not in a business to try to predict human behavior. That's not my business.
Right. So then whose business is it to shut down these businesses who say that it's not my business what people do with this technology?
They're going to say if someone commits pedophilia, then it's upon law enforcement to arrest that person for committing a crime. They're like, again, like,
but then also these companies say like we're not going to turn over our users' messages.
Correct.
Like
Correct.
Apple wouldn't unencrypt the phones of those people in California. There's like 2 terrorists in California who murdered a bunch of people, and Apple's like, no, we can't open their phones for you, unlock their phones, because that would be against our policies and terms, which is to me ludicrous. But like at some point, encryption needs to be curtailed to protect the safety of people, of normal people. Let's call them normies.
Normies.
Normal, everyday people who don't want pedophilia, who don't want terrorism. Like if we took a straw poll, like let's have democracy in action. Like who would want to unencrypt all messages and all platforms? My guess would be like 80% of the country would want to unencrypt everything.
Oh, I think it's
95%.
No, I think it's more like 50-50.
Oh, geez, no, it can't be.
Yeah, I mean,
in this country,
the problem is, I think like 80%, I think like 20% of the country actually understands what encryption is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like if you just ask them, do you want messages on social network encrypted? They're going to be like, maybe. But if you explain it to them about what it is, do you want, like, I mean, again, it all comes down to phrasing. Then if you're going to take a survey, like, do you want other people to be able to see what you're writing to other people? Like you ask older people that, they're going to be like, hell no. Hell no. So like everyone over 60 is going to say, no, I don't. So then they are actually casting a vote in favor for encryption.
Well, yeah, and I think young people don't want encryption. I mean, do want encryption. They don't want stuff unencrypted so that they can send nudes to each other and protect their burgeoning political careers.
So it always comes down to like the line in the sand, right? Like the question is like, at what point do you want encryption to be lifted? Like if someone is saying, if someone is using a messaging platform to plan a terrorist attack, do you want that encryption to be cracked? Yes, I do. If you are sending,
wait. So that's a good question to lead into. So it's like, okay. You say 50-50. So here's the question that you ask people. If you enable encryption, it allows attacks like what happened in, what's the name of the city? Like
I lost it for a second.
Terrorist attack. San Bernardino. Okay, so if you like the people who perpetrated the San Bernardino attack in 2015 used encrypted messaging on their Apple device to coordinate it with terrorists from around the world. If you enable encrypted messaging, that's the kind of activities that can occur. Do you want to have encrypted messages for yourself while also allowing these kinds of encrypted messages, or do you want no encrypted messages? Period.
And I think you're going to get 50-50.
Wow, that's so depressing. That's so sad.
I think that a number of people will just reject your premise on its face that we don't know if what they use to, and which is basically arguing for encryption or against encryption. We don't know exactly what they were saying. It's the whole gun argument where, well, if they hadn't had this messaging app, they would have used the telephone or whatever. Like the whole thing about like they
would have used technologies that are much more easily trackable and traceable and lead to actual terrorist activities being stopped.
Yeah, and so the same thing is like, well, you can't. What good does it do to harm someone to get a weapon or a firearm. If they can't get a firearm, they're going to kill people with a knife, kind of thing. So there's this defeatist attitude among so many people.
Which,
In
to
this
your point, I
country.
think knife attacks in London are at like an all-time high. So maybe they're right.
But they're butter knives at tea time, so it's not that big of a deal.
There's a rash of scone murders being perpetrated in the city of London. Yeah, I guess like at the end of the day, like I'm all for stability and sort of like a calm baseline standard of day-to-day activities for the world. So technologies that disrupt that or make it any shakier are always negative to me. And I think that's sort of like the role of society. What the role of society and government should be is just like stability and peace and like letting people get on with and especially letting like useful people get on with doing useful activities that makes everyone's lives better.
Well,
Like that's what the goal of government should be.
It always comes back down to like human nature, and so you kind of have come down on the side of corporations with like corporate responsibility, and we shouldn't be building things that enable the darker side of humanity. Whereas I'm more like I'm more like same thing. Like as long as there's going to be a sense of civil disobedience, there's going to be corporations who will make a profit off of that. So like my point is, if there was no market for it, these corporations wouldn't build stuff for it. So like I always come down more on the side of personal responsibility than corporate responsibility, because like again, a corporation is by definition like more than one person, and the more people you add, the like worse stuff gets. So like at the micro level, I sort of go down to the smallest individual unit and be like, you're the problem. You are the problem.
But then
like,
why are you for surveillance?
What's that?
Why are you for surveillance then?
Because I think it's the only way to like keep an eye on people at a micro level, because they're always going to be the problem, and they're going to create that demand.
So you're for personal responsibility, but you don't trust people to be personally responsible.
Exactly. That's right. So you have to. This is why I was in favor of kind of like China's social currency type thing, because like it's like, no, you're not being civic minded. We're going to prevent you from taking the subway or whatever it is, and right, kind of force that civic responsibility upon people, because they're just not going to do it on their own.
Interesting. I mean, that's an interesting conundrum. Like you want individual liberty, but the second that you make everyone like as free as they possibly can be, it devolves into chaos and insanity.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's like the broken window theory too. Is like once they do something mildly awful, then they feel emboldened to do something completely awful.
It's like those people licking ice cream in grocery stores. You heard about that? That's a new internet craze.
Yeah. Yep.
Or like spitting in mouthwash. I think that's another meme, internet meme. So yeah, I guess if your foundational principle is people are awful, like how do we deal with the fact that people are awful?
Which is my foundational principle.
Should be everyone's foundational. Yeah, like that's, you can't get past that. You can't get away from that.
Right.
I mean, to me, then you can't allow technologies like, I mean, it's out there. You have to do everything in your power to stop technologies like encryption and encrypted messaging and, you know, the Tor network and stuff like that, because that's going to encourage real awful behavior.
Yeah, except for like, again, by regulating companies, you're going a step up. Like you're going a step above. Like I want to regulate at the ground floor. I want to regulate humanity. I don't want to regulate companies. Like, because companies are just a collection of humans. So let's actually get to the root of the problem, which is humans, and regulate the humans.
But how do you regulate humans when they have tools like encrypted messaging? Like, what's a solution for because you can retroactively gain access to devices after people have done stuff.
Right, but
That's really not worth it.
if you really do have a massive surveillance state, you can like see if person A is 60 years old, is 60 years old and is going around 13-year-olds more than a normal 60-year-old would go around 13-year-olds, kind of thing.
So I guess your solution, so the solution is just to constantly monitor people. But I guess like
totally Minority Report, prevent them from being awful before they're awful.
But I guess isn't that the point of like encryption? Or are you talking about monitoring people like in their homes?
Yeah, monitor them in their homes. Fine.
Okay.
No, seriously. I mean, again, that's such a like gut reaction. Like, oh, that's horrible. That's horrible. But like, if you're just living your life, like, what are you scared your recipe for like beef Wellington is going to get leaked to the world? Like, what are you?
Yes, actually, but go ahead.
I mean, it sounds so awful on its face, but when you dig deeper into it, like, what are you actually trying to protect? You're trying to prevent a tyrannical government, which I understand is a concern, but it's like, let's actually prevent that. Let's deal with that in two separate instances, because honestly, you're not also trying to like stage a coup in your home either. So how is what you're talking about, actually preventing, how is your privacy preventing the government from turning tyrannical?
Well, yeah,
that's what I mean, kind of thing. And so, yeah, the only way to prevent people from being awful is just to monitor them all the time. And it does require a great sense of trust in the government, which hasn't really earned it. I understand that, meaning like they have to house this data somewhere. And whenever the government houses data somewhere, it always gets breached. It always gets leaked. But again, we're talking about like extreme solutions to a growing problem.
Well, and not to mention that, like, when you've granted governments that level of power, historically, it's proved to be a complete disaster for people. I mean, you have like 60 million people in Soviet Russia who, or I guess that's one estimate of the numbers, who were summarily executed under Stalin. I guess it got better after that, but like you had show trials, you had people being set up, you had the government planting evidence, and it would be so much easier to do stuff like that with if it was digital evidence that was used to convict people. But I mean, I guess to your point, and not to get like too metaphysical, but like it's kind of interesting that it's almost like you want a god-like figure constantly watching you and making sure that you're not doing anything bad.
Yeah. Which again, we've talked about the death of religion. We used to kind of have that, which would keep people in line, and more we have less and less of that. And so if we have to replace
an artificial god
with the government, so be it. Like whatever stops this awfulness that is just pervading the country. And again, it's we have an administration that I think is probably the worst keepers,
best, the most like ethical, upright,
exactly,
of all time.
So it's weird for me to kind of be saying this, and again, I'm taking this as like an extreme solution to like what I don't think is an extreme problem yet, but it's going to quickly become an extreme problem.
It's interesting. It's a tough debate. I mean, it's weird to think about what the actual solutions are, and it's weird that technology has enabled a lot of this stuff. And so now we're thinking of like these crazy technological solutions where you have basically cameras in every room in everyone's house, and you're constantly monitoring people to deal with the fact that people can communicate. It's such a can of worms once you allow massive communication, massive global communication, and you connect people. You basically connect all the horrible people. And once you connect all the horrible people, you need insane solutions to deal with the fact that all these horrible people are not connected.
Right. Exactly right. And
it's almost like humans were never meant to be connected like this, because like just, law of averages, there was only going to be one or two horrible people in a community of, a couple hundred folks. But now with the internet, where you have communities of billions of people, you now have tens of millions of horrible people coordinating with each other.
And it
And
makes
like,
it
go ahead.
Go ahead. I would say it just makes it easier for like these cults of bad behavior to be created. Like cults were so like rare and extreme and small, but now like you see cultish behavior everywhere on the internet on a massive scale. And so it just connects people who would otherwise be kind of relegated to the fringes of society into the mainstream.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So if that's the reality, what are the realistic solutions to that? And I guess maybe it is massive surveillance. And, you know, I guess like with encryption software, there's no way to stop people from using the Tor network. There's no way to stop people from using encrypted messaging apps. If you take down Telegram, there's going to be 1,000 Telegrams to replace it. It's like Hydra. It's like
Right,
some
right.
terrible nerdy Hydra, even more nerdy Hydra. Um, yeah, so I guess at that point, maybe master surveillance is the only answer, the only realistic answer, which is weird, but I guess is maybe reality. So I guess that's gonna do it for this depressing episode of the text ethics series. We have special guests coming on next week. It should be a really interesting topic too. We have Paul Johnston from Serverless Days is going to be joining us to talk about the algorithmic life. So stuff like we were talking about with sentencing software, they're now using algorithms to sort of determine what sentences should be used for what crimes. Diagnoses in hospitals, a lot of like improvements in care and stuff like that is being done algorithmically, and sort of there's been some fallout from that, some negative consequences. So we're going to talk about that next week. So make sure to tune in for that Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. Check out the blog posters episode at gunnertech.com. The podcast will be available on iTunes. Hop on our Facebook page and enter our Country Store giveaway. Country Store is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. You can visit them at countrystoreoutfitters.com. And while you're on our Facebook page, answer our question of the week, which this week coming up is, would you be okay with a computer determining the sentence for a criminal? It's worded something like that. But hop on our Facebook page and answer that question. Oh, and check out our ebooks on Amazon, iBooks, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and anywhere else ebooks are sold. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. I'm Derry. That's Cody. We'll see you next week.